Next order of business is roll call. Members, please indicate your presence when the machine is open. The following members are excused. Representatives Ledbetter and Lucas. Please welcome our doctors of the day, Dr. Adam Durlberg and Dr. Savannah Nam from Franciscan Health. Thank you, doctors. While the members vote, they tie the roll. Roll call shows 74 members present. The chair declares quorum for conducting business. House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that when we do adjourn, we adjourn until April 24, 2023 at 10 a.m. Representative Lehman.
Heard the motion. Second, all those in favor, in case saying aye. Those opposed, no. Motion is adopted. We are starting at 10 a.m. on Monday morning. Depending on how the week goes, we may adjust that time earlier, not later. One House motion. House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House dissent from the Senate amendments to engross House Bill 1590 and that the Speaker appointed...
For the motion, second, all those in favor, in case saying aye. Those opposed, no. Motion is adopted. So today we recognize our staffs who I don't think any of us can fully appreciate or articulate our appreciation for, and so we want to make sure we recognize them properly. So we'll begin with the Republicans' Communications and Technology Office. The director is Aaron Wittern, and Courtney Hayden is the deputy director and intern director. Republican press secretaries Wade Coxall and Braden Dunlap, Matthew Gokin, Abram Hurt, Charles Melton, and Sarah Stillinger. The Democrat Communications Office, Hannah Smith, the director, Anna Gruver, and Brianna Cooper. The Democratic Publications Office, Lauren Kuhn, director and intern director. The Republican Legislative Staff, Brittany Jenkins, the director of Legislative Operations, Andrew Alvarez, deputy director. The Republican Senior Legislative Assistants, Bethany Schrock, the director of Intern Recruitment and Development, John Brunhammer, Kaylee Kohlinger, Dolan Monroe, and Aaron Wainscott. Republican Legislative Assistants, Vito Moore, Scott Berghoff, Evan Chris, Hunter Frost, Carter Folk, Nathan Hood, Caleb Jackson, Mason Jognowski, Devon Joyce, Connor McCarthy, Corby Petro, Spencer Schreiner, Drew Sellers, Lucas White, Skylar Wood, and Ethan Wright. The Democratic Legislative Assistants, Ann Hancock, the Director, Katie Beaumont, Gregory Buchanan, Gabrielle Donnelly, Maura Kehoe, Caitlin Sears, John Spence, Eric Verdon, and Daron Searcy, the IBLC Director. Thank you so much for the incredible job that all of you do. Be a crazy next few days. Thank you for making the crazy just a little more possible. So we're going to begin the process today of making floor announcements for for rules committees meetings. Those rule committee meetings will be held in Ways and Means, but the process is, as you can remember, is they're announced from the floor. Will then go to the rules committee. The rules committee will take their actions, come back to the floor at some point later, and vote on the conference committee reports. With that, Representative Smaltz for a committee announcement.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rules Committee will meet immediately upon recess and would like to ask Representative Steuerwald, House Bill 1006, Representative Goodrich, House Bill 1382, and Representative Pressel, House Bill 1016. If we all get up there, we'll get it done as quick as we can.
Caucus announcements. Representative Steuerwald for an announcement.
The House Republicans will caucus upon adjournment of the Rules Committee, so be light on your feet.
Representative Hamilton for an announcement.
House Democrats will caucus upon adjournment of the Rules Committee in 156B.
So we will go to rules, then caucus. We'll have an agenda. We'll have a calendar for this afternoon. What I would anticipate is we'll work through the calendar on the calendar that gets posted this afternoon. What I'd really like to do, and I'll work with Lear G. Quinna, is to have a rules committee meeting post that adjournment. If we have conference committee reports that have all 4 signatures that can go to rules, then that would be the generation of what our calendar will be for 10 a.m. on Monday morning. So that's kind of what the day shapes up to be. If we can stay on task, I'd really appreciate if both caucuses could work through talking about conference committee reports in which action can be taken. With that, the House will stand in recess till the fall of the gavel at 1:30 p.m. Carbaugh. Quorum call. Representative Carbaugh suggests a quorum call in a second. When the machine is open, please indicate your presence. Have all the members voted? Tally the roll. Roll call says 86 members present. The chair declares a quorum for conducting of business. We do have a conference committee change on Senate Bill 334. Remove Conferee Heine and replace him with Conferee Judy. We will begin with the House Concurrence Committee's reports eligible for action. And bear with me, once a year we go through this process. So committee report.
Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Rules and Legislative Procedures has under consideration House Rule 161.1 and recommends.
Question is on the adoption of the committee report. All those in favor indicate saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Committee report is adopted. House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that House Rule 161.1 be suspended so that the following conference committee reports are eligible.
For the motion, the second. All those in favor indicate saying aye. Those opposed, no. Motion is adopted. Chair, hands down, conference committee report number 1 on House Bill 1006.
Do I read just the regular, the motion? Mr. Speaker, your conference committee appointed to confer with the Light Committee from the Senate upon engrossed Senate amendments.
For the conference committee report, Representative Steuerwald to discuss the conference committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Hey, Mr. Speaker. Okay, there we go. Conference Committee report on 1086. So the changes between 1006 as it left the House and as we have before us today, we addressed advanced nurse practitioners and physicians' assistants can do the examination and help with the assessment during the emergency and immediate detention aspects, but only a doctor can sign the petition for probable cause for detention. That's also true of testifying in court. Only the physician may testify in a court proceeding. To say that there's been a wide discrepancy across the state on how the process and procedures are done for immediate and emergency detention would be an understatement. So we spoke to the Office of Judicial Administration. They're going to prepare forms for statewide use so we can have some uniformity and consistency on how the court finds probable cause for the detention. We made it explicitly clear that if a court grants this petition for detention, that authorizes a medical treatment plan and medication to be administered. We also added language with the help of interested parties to make it clear once again that these services are medically necessary to ensure payment. We tweaked the timeline a little bit. We had 3 or 4 technical corrections, a couple commas, and that are the changes. So I appreciate your support.
Is there further discussion on the conference committee report? Representative Pierce, speak on the conference committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. This is a really important, great bill. It's really moving us down the pathway we need to go to reduce crime and to salvage a lot of lives by getting at the underlying root cause of why people end up in the criminal justice system, mental health issues, addiction issues, all those. So it's an excellent bill, but I can't let the moment go by without just kind of warning people that this 1006, as many of the previous 1006s, will only be successful if we as the General Assembly provide the resources necessary to these local communities to be able to provide that treatment, to have the providers, to have the facilities. So, you know, my message to those of you who will be deciding weighty budget issues in the next week here, I hope that you will properly fund these initiatives and put us on a path where we really can have regional mental health facilities actually staffed by the providers we need, so that anyone that finds themselves ensnared in the criminal justice system, mainly because of their mental health challenges or addictions they're fighting, that they can immediately get the help they need. If we can do that, we will really revolutionize what happens in our criminal justice system and what we see happening on the streets of our communities in many places throughout the state.
Is there further discussion? The author would like to close. When the machine is open, the question is on the adoption of the Conference Committee report. When the machine is open, those in favor of adopting the Conference Committee report will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. Of all the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 91 ayes, 0 noes. The Conference Committee report has been adopted. The clerk shall inform the Senate of the adoption of the Conference Committee report. House Bill 1016, Representative Pressel. Chair hands down Conference Committee report number 1 on House Bill 1016.
Mr. Speaker, your Conference Committee appointed to confer with the White Committee from the Senate upon
For the Conference Committee report, Representative Pressel for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. Conference Committee report for 1016, which is the fire and police merit system, resets to exactly where it left the House, where you all supported it with a unanimous vote. So it's back to the House-originated version, and I'd appreciate your support on the CCR.
Further discussion on the Conference Committee report, Representative Campbell will speak on the Conference Committee report.
I'd just like to thank Representative Pressel for working on this legislation. This is going to help our police and fire merit boards kind of take the politics out of working in our safety professions and try to get back to them being able to advance on their own merits. And I encourage your support. Thanks.
Is there further discussion on the Conference Committee report? Chair sees none. The question is on the adoption of the Conference Committee report. When the machine is open, those in favor of adopting the Conference Committee report will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. For all the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 90 ayes, 1 no. The Conference Committee report has been adopted. The clerk shall inform the Senate of the adoption of the Conference Committee report. House Bill 1382, Representative Goodrich. The chair hands down House Conference Committee report number 1 on House Bill 1382.
Mr. Speaker, your Conference Committee appointed to confer with the White Committee from the Senate upon
For the Conference Committee report, Chair recognizes Representative Goodrich for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the House. So 1382 is the robotics bill, establishes a private-public partnership for after-school robotics. When it passed out of the House, it went to the Senate. It did 3 things that I think made the bill better. There was a date confusion, so it moved it from July 1st, 24 to 23, because that aligned with the budget. A technical amendment making the words consistent throughout the bill from team to entity. And one thing the bill had, there was a small piece of proprietary information that kind of made one group ahead of the other group, and we took that out and levelized that from a competition standpoint. And the only thing else it did, when it came back from the Senate, it was a may provision. We made it a shall. Appreciate your support on the Conference Committee report. Thank you.
For discussion, Representative Klinker to speak on the Conference Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I thank Representative Goodrich very much for authoring this bill, particularly now, because it does include a specific new provision to ensure that children with disabilities on robotics teams are accommodated and are able to participate. And I must say that many of us are very pleased about this in our area because McCutcheon High School in Lafayette, Indiana, and West Lafayette High School are both going to Houston for the finals, and so these grants are very timely, and we appreciate the fact that our state is really number one almost in robotics, and Purdue University is very involved in that and is helping with the first robotics team. So thank you very much, Representative Goodrich, and I hope that you'll vote yes on this bill. Thank you.
Further discussion? Chair sees none. Would the author like to close? He would not. The question is on the adoption of the Conference Committee report. When the machine is open, those in favor of adopting the Conference Committee report will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. While the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 91 ayes, 0 noes. The Conference Committee report has been adopted. The clerk shall inform the Senate of the adoption of the Conference Committee report. Going to start on the back of the House on the concurrence is eligible for action. Calendar, House Bill 1635, Representative Behning. I'm sorry. My apologies. House Bill 1637, Representative Behning. House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House do concur with the Senate amendments to engross House Bill 1630.
You've heard the motion. Is there a second? The chair recognizes Representative Behning for a motion to concur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, the change the Senate made is very simple. All they did is the Next Generation Hoosier Educator Scholarship today requires a 3.5 GPA, and they reduced that to a 3.0 GPA, and that's the only change the Senate made. I would appreciate your support.
For discussion on the motion to concur, chair sees none. The question is on the adoption of the motion to concur. When the machine is open, those in favor of adopting the motion will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. Representative Speedy, would you like to vote? While the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 86 ayes, 4 noes. The motion to concur has been adopted. Clerk shall inform the Senate of the adoption of the motion to concur. House Bill 1635, Representative Behning, House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House reconsider its actions whereby.
For the motion, is there a second? Chair recognizes Representative Behning speak on the motion to concur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A few more changes to this bill than the prior. 1635 left the House dealing with waiver rates that would be reported for each individual schools. It did not have a prohibition that schools could not issue waivers. It's for purposes of reporting. When it left here, it was at 8 and 4. What we worked collaboratively with the department and have changed that to 9% would be the max in 23-24, 6% 24-25, and 3% in June 25 forward. We also had language dealing with adjunct teachers in here, that non-public schools would have access to it. It was a mistake on our side that we did not have charter schools, so they reset and put charter schools into it as well. They put language in dealing, if you remember, this also had language dealing with the ASFAB, and as it left here, we had a lot of discussion. It required that a student enlist. They changed that as well, working with the department, and that requires that schools submit documentation on a form prescribed by the department that demonstrates the student's intent. So parents will be aware of this if they use ASFAB as their pathway. Also put in language that says the state board shall, by July 1st of 23, review and update guidance issued on ASFAB in regarding it as a pathway, as well as it says that none of our schools may require a student enrolled in the school to participate in any particular pathway. So the pathway is totally up to the parent and the student. The school district cannot require them to go one way or the other. There's also tweak with language dealing with 1% an alternative diploma. That actually makes sure that our language now conforms to the federal requirement. And then the last thing in it, the Senate did put some, I shouldn't say last, there's two more things. Senate did put language in dealing with immunizations. It says any notification or materials provided or distributed by the Indiana Department of Health or a school to a parent of a student regarding required or recommended immunizations for the student must clearly delineate or label immunizations that are required and immunizations that are recommended. So they would know whether one was required and what the other one was recommended. And the last thing they took out that we intend to put in another bill was a null grade that was originally in this bill. It will show up in another conference committee. Appreciate your support.
For discussion on the Commissioner report, Dr. Smith, speak on the Commissioner report. Oh, the yield, he yields.
Representative Behning, the provision that says that you cannot include anything on the transcript other than those things that are itemized, is that for the purpose of making sure that immunization records are not transferred?
I believe that was in this bill originally. That was not changed by the Senate, yes.
Okay, but it
The
says
immunization records are not required. There's a list, if you remember, of things that have to be required, but immunization records would not be required.
so. There's okay, but it said that it removed the provision to do that, like we had it in there when it left.
The option, you'd have to give me the exact place because I went through.
I don't know exactly what it is. I'm just reading the summary of the
Well, I'm
changes.
reading the
Actual bill.
actual bill, so.
Okay, the part that you have to have documentation that the student intends to enlist in the military. If that is signed and the student determines that at a later date that he or she does not want to go into the military, is there any mandate?
There's no penalty.
There's no penalty, okay.
It just means the parent has to know that their son or daughter is using ASFAB and that ASFAB is for acceptance in the United States military.
Could you describe for me again, bring to my recall the provisions that's associated with this adjunct teacher?
Yeah, if you go, adjunct teacher language, I think is on page 9. We passed adjunct teacher last year, which would allow for individuals who have 4,000 hours experience. It required the local governing body to go ahead and approve by a vote of the governing body to allow, and they would issue a license that would apply only in that school district and in that content area. We did specifically say that that was excluded from special ed, was not an option, but that language was in this bill, and all that the Senate did is add charter school to that section.
Okay, do you have any feedback on, well, that legislation was passed last year. Have you gotten any feedback on the 1 year of operation if any school corporations have requested.
There have been several school districts that are utilizing it, yes, I know that for a fact. I know that some of the rural schools, at least 3 or 4 rural schools I'm aware of, but they have used it as well. There was some cleanup language on ASVAB that did not get changed. I mean, not on ASVAB, on adjunct teacher, that specifically delineated that it could also be used for CTE. We had a workplace specialist in code that was passed 2 years ago. Then we passed adjunct teacher last year, and in adjunct teacher language said it could be used for anything except for special ed. And then we had some debate as to whether or not that applied to CTE, and now it does, clearly defined in this bill.
And then there's one other provision I see that might have been made in the Senate, and that deals with notification of parents or recommendation to parents of those immunizations that are required versus those that are recommended.
Yeah, that's the last thing that I mentioned. It says, any notification or materials provided or distributed by the Indiana Department of Health or a school to a parent of a student regarding required or recommended immunizations for the student must clearly delineate or label immunizations that are required and immunizations that are recommended.
Do you happen to know what criteria will be used to determine which ones are required versus those that are recommended?
It's the Department of Health and what they require and then what they recommend. So those that are currently in Department of Health rules or statute, I suppose. I don't know that we have many immunizations in statute, but those would be the ones that are required, others that would be optional.
Permission to speak.
You're recognized, Dr. Smith.
There are several features in this bill. I think that there were several votes against this bill when it left the House, and then there was opposition also on the Senate side, which included even some of the Republicans voting against this bill. However, it did pass, and it's back over here for concurrence. I'm concerned about the adjunct teacher. I think there's enough waivers already, and many of the charter schools as well as some of the public schools, traditional public schools, are already getting waivers. I know in Gary there's been some teachers that probably gotten waivers up to about 10 years, and then the Department of Education indicated that they no longer were going to grant them. So there's already a provision for that. I think we're creating too many alternative ways to get bodies into classrooms. I don't know if they're teachers, but bodies into the classrooms. I'm also concerned about not passing on the immunization records. I think universities need to know what possibly would occur health-wise on their campuses based on those students who come in who are immunized versus those who are not. I think the institutions for higher learning, when they came before our committee, indicated that they would like to have that information and gave justifiable reasons. I wish I could recall all of the reasons that were given, but they had a need for that information. And I think it's a protection for all the students who are on campus. I'm concerned about this legislation removing the null grade. I imagine that the chairman has a place that he's going to resurrect this language. I think it's important, given the academic conditions that we've had recently in our schools, that we need to continue with providing a null grade for the past academic year. For those reasons, I urge you not to vote for this piece of legislation. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Will the author like to close? Questions on the adoption of the motion to concur? All those in favor, when the machine is open, will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. If all the members voted, tell the roll. Roll call shows 66 ayes, 27 noes. The motion concur has been adopted. Clerk shall inform the Senate of the adoption of the motion to concur. House Bill 1609, Representative Davis, House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House to concur with the Senate amendments.
You've heard the motion. Is there a second? Chair recognizes Representative Davis to speak on the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. So the Senate made two minor changes to this Department of Workforce Development bill. They removed the language from the House version that requires no more than 15% of the total appropriation for adult education and literacy activities in the bill to the Department for administrative and support costs incurred by eligible providers. They also added some language: in order to be an eligible employee, the employee must have been paid wages by the eligible employer for time spent receiving instruction in adult ed and literacy activities. I appreciate your support.
For discussion on the motion to concur, Chair sees none. The question is on the adoption of the motion to concur. When the machine is open, those in favor of adopting the motion will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. Representative McNamara, would you like to vote? All the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 92 ayes, 0 noes. Motion to concur has been adopted. Clerk shall inform the Senate of the adoption of the motion to concur. House Bill 1558, Representative Teshka. Representative Teshka passes. 1512, Representative Speedy. House Bill 1512, Representative Speedy, House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House to concur with the Senate amendments to...
For the motion and second, the chair recognizes Representative Speedy to speak on the motion to concur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 1512, as it left the House, was an extension of a pilot program to expand and study the recycling practices. The program was administered by IDEM with some help of a board within its purview. The Senate added an amendment that did basically two things. One, for these grants that companies are seeking from IDEM, that we added a financial match, so they have skin in the game. The second thing that we did that worked on in the Senate is a summer study committee request. Within that summer study committee request, we want to make sure that we're reviewing fees paid for incineration now, methods and technologies in recycling, so we know the best practices, review the goals of this program going forward to make sure that it's doing what we hope it's doing, as well as the board that I had mentioned who awards the grants, make sure that they are properly aligned with the goal of the underlying bill. And that's what the amendment did in the Senate, and I'd ask that we concur with it.
Further discussion on the motion to concur. Chair sees none. The question is on the adoption of the motion to concur. When the machine is open, those in favor of adopting the motion will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. If all the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 93 ayes, 0 noes. Motion to concur has been adopted. The clerk shall inform the Senate of the adoption of the motion to concur. House Bill 1492, Representative McNamara, House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House to concur with the Senate amendments to engross...
For the motion, the second, the chair recognizes Representative McNamara to speak on the motion to concur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. House Bill 1492, School Safety Bill. The Senate removed the provision that would allow the local law enforcement agency to apply in conjunction with the local school corporations, public and non-public. The second thing that was added on second reading would allow for the secured school fund to be used for purchase of equipment, hardware, materials, and then technology to assist with the emergency medical response on school property, also known as an AED. Appreciate your support.
Further discussion on the motion? Chair sees none. The question is on the adoption of the motion to concur. When the machine is open, those in favor of adopting the motion will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. While the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 92 ayes, 0 noes. The motion to concur has been adopted. Clerk shall inform the Senate of the adoption of the motion to concur. House Bill 1461, Representative Barrett, House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House to concur with the Senate amendments to ingress.
For the motion and second, the chair recognizes Dr. Barrett for a motion to concur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a bill in the assisted living space. It passed the House 89-0, and it passed the Senate 50-0. There are really 4 issues that were addressed in the Senate. One clarified the expedited eligibility space, something we worked on the front half but didn't quite get done. What they were able to do was, using a third-party vendor, ensure that we get to a 72-hour timeline for placement. And then it created a study so that this process could be looked at in terms of its timeliness with reporting back. Secondly, it clarified the ability to transfer Medicaid beds in nursing facilities within a county. There's some clarification that was necessary in terms of that process. Thirdly, it worked on the landlord-tenant space. Again, we addressed this on the front half, but weren't quite able to come to a compromise. We have now been able to clarify that language through the development of rules to the Department of Health so that you remember this space is difficult in that this is assisted living space, so there's some mobility to these patients, but they can pose a risk to themselves and others. And finally, the last thing was we came to some compromise in terms of the business relationship with these temporary staffing agencies. These are the groups that brought in nurses during workforce shortages, and yet we're trying to find some compromise where there wasn't huge payouts involved using Medicaid dollars ultimately using Medicaid dollars to these staffing agencies. We've come to agreement over those 4 areas, and I would appreciate your support.
Further discussion on the motion? Chair sees none. The question is on the adoption of the motion. Concur. When the machine is open, those in favor of adopting the motion will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. While the members voted, tally the roll call shows 93 ayes, 0 noes. Motion to concur has been adopted. Clerk shall inform the Senate of the adoption of the motion to concur. House Bill 1460, Representative Barrett, House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House to concur with the Senate amendments.
You've heard the motion and the second. The chair recognizes Dr. Barrett for a motion to concur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 1460, this was the professional licensing agency bill. Passed the House 89-0, passed the Senate 48-0. 2 things we did to make this bill better on the Senate side. We had created a carve-out in terms of reciprocity on licensure with 4 different groups: social workers, marriage and family therapists, mental health counselors, addiction counselors, and then respiratory care therapists. And just based on a variety of circumstances, we kind of debated rescinding that carve-out, but what the Senate did was it continued that for another year as we strengthened that agency. And finally, it made a minor change in terms of a nursing board allowing accreditation of nursing programs in the state, and it increased the time frame from 30 to 90 days just to allow a little bit more time in that accreditation process. Both these changes make this bill better. I would appreciate your support.
Further discussion on the motion? Chair sees none. The question is on the adoption of the motion. Concur. When the machine is open, those in favor of adopting the motion will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. While the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 92 ayes, 0 noes. Motion concur has been adopted. The clerk shall inform the Senate of the adoption of the motion to concur. House Bill 1457, Representative Barrett, House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House to concur with the Senate amendments to.
For the motion and second, the chair recognizes Dr. Barrett to speak on the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill comes from the Department of Health. It passed this body 96-1, passed the Senate 50-0. 2 improvements to this bill, and they both involved definitions only. A lot of times it's aligning state statute with federal regulations. The first was in memory care services. Just to remind you, there are unlicensed facilities that care for dementia patients. This is a vulnerable population, And in such that these are unlicensed facilities, there was no ability of Department of Health to investigate complaints and then advocate for these patients. This definition change facilitates that without expanding licensure. And finally, it clarified some definitions in the critical access hospital space and rural emergency hospital space. They both make this bill better. I would appreciate your support.
Further discussion on the motion? Dr. Porter, Representative Porter, speak on the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I stand in support of the concurrent 1457. The two changes, as Dr. Barrett alluded to, is very important in regards to the definition and addressing critical aspects in regards to rural hospitals in the rural community. And we appreciate the 100% on this side of the House. Thank you very much.
Further discussion on the motion? Chair sees none. Will the author like to close? Who would not? The question is on the adoption of the motion concur. When the machine is open, those in favor of adopting the motion vote aye. Those opposed vote no. All the members voted, tell the roll. Roll call says 93 ayes, 0 noes. The motion concur has been adopted. Clerk shall inform the Senate of the adoption of the motion concur. House Bill 1420, Representative Soliday, House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House to concur with the Senate amendments.
You've heard the motion and the second. The chair recognizes Representative Soliday. Speak on the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, 1420 is the right of first refusal bill. The change made by the Senate was an amendment that changed the reporting relationship under it, as if a utility decides to exercise their right of first refusal. This is about short-term transmission. They already have right of first refusal and have for 10 years on everything in their footprint. If they have been approved by the RTO, that's PJM or MISO, if they have been approved, they notify the IURC that they're going to act. Then by May 1st of that year, they must show to the IURC the answers to 3 questions: what they are currently building and what they are building, a description of the construction, the reason for it, and then an estimate of construction costs and an estimate of, or a latest revision of their annual formula rate update, which is how the federal Energy Regulatory Commission sets rates on transmission. Then the last paragraph says that the utility must, to the extent possible, competitively bid engineering, procurement, construction contracts. Once they have done all that, they're under the normal IURC processes of rate supervision. That keeps it all within the state, and except for wholesale price of transmission is set by the FERC, no matter who builds it. So I appreciate your vote for the concurrence.
For discussion, Representative Pierce, speak on the motion concur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House. You know, when you first try to learn about this bill and think about it and all this different transmission stuff, it's kind of easy to just get totally lost in the forest and think, you know, this thing is just so complicated that I can't really make heads or tails of it, so I guess I'm just going to have to trust somebody else's judgment who maybe had time to delve into it more than I have. But you know, the truth of it is, as I kind of reviewed this bill one final time for this motion, it's actually pretty simple. It's really a matter of whether you favor competition or monopoly. A vote no is for competition, a vote yes is for monopoly. What does that mean for our ratepayers? With competition, you have an opportunity for lower rates. With monopoly, you're going to lock yourself into higher rates when it comes to paying for these transmission lines, which ultimately all the ratepayers are going to pay for. Now, if you kind of know the story of this, it also makes it kind of simple. If you go back to 2011, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission had a proceeding called FERC 1000. And there was, up to that time, there was what was called a federal right of first refusal. So the federal policy was, yes, when there is a regional transmission project, we'll let that part of it going through an incumbent's territory, we'll let them have the first right of first refusal. Well, in this FERC 1000 in 2011, they got rid of that. They eliminated the right of first refusal. Why did they do it? Well, they put out about 600 pages of a report to explain it. I won't read all that to you, but just a few important paragraphs. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission said, we conclude that leaving federal rights of first refusal in place for these facilities would allow practices that have the potential to undermine the identification and evaluation of a more efficient or cost-effective solution to regional transmission needs, which in turn can result in rates for commission jurisdictional services that are unjust and unreasonable or otherwise result in undue discrimination by public utility transmission providers. And public utility transmission providers, just a public utility like Duke or NIPSCO or CenterPoint when they're doing transmission. So why do they think that's going to be the result? Well, in comments they took in this proceeding, because it was a rulemaking, so people commented, they noted that the Federal Trade Commission stated that the existence of a federal right of first refusal in jurisdictional tariffs and agreements reduces capital investment opportunities for potential non-incumbent developers by increasing their risk, encourages free ridership among incumbent developers, and creates a barrier to entry. And we all know that barriers to entry is what gets you a monopoly if you don't already have one, which we already do. So what's going on that creates these barriers to entry and reduces competition? Here's what FERC had to say about that in 2011. Just as it is not in the economic self-interest of a public utility transmission, in the self-interest of public utility transmission providers to expand transmission capacity to allow access to competing suppliers, it is not in the economic self-interest of incumbent transmission providers to permit new entrants to develop transmission facilities, even if proposals submitted by the new entrants would result in a more efficient or cost-effective solution to the region's needs. We conclude that an incumbent transmission provider's ability to use a right of first refusal to act in its own economic self-interest may discourage new entrants from proposing new transmission projects in the regional transmission planning process. So right of first refusal equals less competition. They went on to say, many commenters note that significant investment is needed to support the development of a successful transmission project, yet there is a disincentive for a non-incumbent transmission developer to commit its resources to a potential transmission project when it runs the risk of an incumbent transmission provider exercising its federal right of first refusal once the benefits of the transmission project are demonstrated. So in other words, what was happening is you had independent third-party companies coming into this planning process, and they were spending their hard-earned dollars and their efforts to come up with new, more efficient transmission projects. And they would lay that out and say to the regional transmission operator, the RTO, which in this case is MISO, it would say, hey, here's our proposal for a really good economical transmission project that will improve the flow of things, reduce congestion. Well, when you give the right of first refusal to the incumbent utility, what that means is all the money and effort they put into identifying that new efficient transmission line, they don't get a chance to even bid on it. Because the incumbent just gets to say, okay, I'll take that one. That's the free rider part. And all this, in the end, results in higher costs for our consumers. And so what you essentially have going on here is in 2011, the federal government, through FERC, determined that right of first refusal is not good. Not good for ratepayers, not good for competition. And now that we have all kinds of money flooding into the transmission space, we got federal money, we have lots of renewables, have to get their energy from one place to another. There are billions and billions of dollars flowing into this. And so the utilities are like, gee, we need to get right of first refusal back, but the feds won't give it to us, so where do we go? Let's go to our local neighborhood legislature. Let's ask them to give us right of first refusal. Let's have them give us our monopoly back. So that's the big picture. And let me just finish with a little bit of get in the woods here a little bit. So it's important to know that when this bill passed the House, a lot was made of the fact that we had language in here that said this incumbent utility with the right of first refusal would have to solicit bids for the construction of the proposed project, and it said they had to consider 3 factors. They were supposed to consider the specifications, whether they're meeting the quality required for the project, whether it could be timely executed, and most importantly, the second one was they had to consider the lowest reasonable cost for the project. And we gave the IURC the ability to hear complaints from people who think that the utility didn't run the bidding process correctly, because remember, the utility is going to be totally in charge of the bidding process. So a lot was made of that. It's like we're protected because the competition is going to be right here, because that utility has to do these bids in order to construct a project. Well, what did the Senate do? They completely rewrote that section. They threw out the lowest reasonable cost stuff. And they just said that an incumbent electric transmission owner to exercise its right to do this first refusal, to construct an electric transmission facility approved for construction through a regional transmission organization planning process must, here comes the lawyerly weasel words, to the extent commercially practicable. Right? So commercially practicable is like your big loophole. To me, it's like 2 notches above if you feel like it. But it opens the door for them to say, like, yeah, we would have liked to do that, but commercially, it just wasn't really practical to actually use competitively bid. And so we've really watered the language down. We're letting utilities set what the requirements of the bid are going to be. And so we no longer have them being required to consider whether the bid is the lowest reasonable cost for the project. So when you add all that up, it's really pretty simple. The utilities want to reassert the monopoly they once had over all these regional transmission projects. If they get it, the rates are going to be higher, because not only does the third party that might, in the current system, which I guess I should make sure you remember this, if this bill does not pass under current law for these regional projects, MISO runs the bidding process. MISO does not have these conflicts of interest that are inherent with the incumbent utility. And so they would be managing the process and getting the bids from all of the people who would like to have an opportunity to do this project. Now, the thing to remember is we're not only bidding in that MISO project for construction of the project, but also for the maintenance and operation of it. So in other words, that third-party company is going to not only build that line, it's going to own it. And it's going to profit from what FERC will let it charge for the use of that line. Under this bill, the utility is going to construct it, and they're going to be the ones owning and operating it. And because we don't have the kind of competitive bidding, that the really robust competitive bidding you would have with MISO, you're going to end up with a project that probably costs more to build and probably will cost more to maintain and operate. And guess what? FERC, which is going to set the wholesale rate for that line, they have to base that on, they have to look at what did it cost to build and what does the utility say it's going to cost to maintain and operate it. So you're building in a greater expense. That greater expense then trickles down, ends up in the rate base, and ends up taking money out of our constituents' pockets. So I'm urging you, for those of you in this room who say that competition is the best way to increase quality and lower prices, that not having a monopoly is not the way to go. if you really believe in competition, you need to vote against this bill. You need to give an opportunity for your constituents to benefit from a free market system in which companies from all across America with the expertise can come to MISO and they can say, you know what, I can build that better. I can build it cheaper. I can be innovative. I can think of a way to route a line that will be more beneficial. This bill takes away the innovation that comes from a free market economy. And I'm just asking you today to vote no on this bill and stand up for free markets.
Further discussion? Chair sees none. Will the author like to close?
Well, that was interesting. Let me say first that FERC 1000 was thought up as a bright idea by some folks in California. And there's a report that was issued based on theoretical data called the Brattle Report, paid for by LS Power, one of the two companies advocating for killing this bill. After we had some experience, if you read FERC 1000, all of it, it authorized the states to do ROFR. That's why we already have it. And when you look at the later report based upon actual findings, there really is no savings. Because one of the favorite tricks under the FERC system is low bid, and once that's done, it's not over. Because now you can come back in with change orders, sometimes 50, 75%. The reason that almost every state in the Midwest is now moving forward with a regional ROFR bill is so that their regulatory authority can control price. Now, the wholesale price is the same whoever builds it, because it's set by FERC. So the fact is, one of the things that's a little scary, if you look at the government website, the most expensive electricity in states is the deregulated states. Another California brilliant idea. The deregulated states are the most expensive. We do regulated monopolies, and the IURC serves the role as the competition because we have an enforcement entity and the simple system. It's great to make a speech, great, about competition and capitalism. I lived it my whole life, and I believe in it. But when it comes to utilities, the question you have to ask yourself, do I trust the federal government or our bipartisan commission that we can call up at any time and hold them accountable for them maintaining their mandate? If you read our code, 8-1, if you can't sleep, you will find that in that there is accountability for competitive bidding within the process. And I'll leave you with this thought. We just heard that we ought to bid operations and maintenance. 3 weeks ago, you saw an example of when the locals control operation and maintenance. We lost 76,000 people's electricity in a tornado. And I'll show you the pictures of the spaghetti that the transmission towers were turned into. 76,000 without power. And when the local folks went out to fix it, we had restored power to all but 1,200 in less than 24 hours. Our locals do a good job. There is accountability. I urge you to vote for this bill.
Questions on the adoption motion occur when the machine is open. Those in favor of adopting the motion will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. All the members voted. Tally the roll. Roll call shows 55 ayes, 39 noes. Motion concur has been adopted. The clerk shall inform the Senate of the adoption of the motion concur. House Bill 1317, Representative Miller, House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House reconsider its actions whereby it dissented from the Senate amendments to engross House Bill 1317. The House.
Further motion is second. The chair recognizes Representative Miller to speak on the amendment. On the motion, Kerr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, 1317 is the compacts and commissions language that passed out of the House, almost unanimous, same out of the Senate. When it got to the Senate, LSA found that they put the language in the wrong in the wrong chapter, and they created a new chapter, and it's chapter 15.5 now. And I'd ask for your support of the concurrence. Thank you.
Further discussion? Chair sees none. The question is on the adoption of the motion. Kerr. When the machine is open, those in favor of adopting the motion will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. While the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 89 ayes, 0 noes. Motion to concur has been adopted. Clerk shall inform the Senate of the adoption of the motion to concur. House Bill 1236, Representative Pressel, House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House to concur with the Senate amendments to.
Further motion is second. Chair recognizes Representative Pressel to speak on the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Senate made a couple changes in 1236. All of them I'm real good with. This is just as a refresher. It's the motor vehicle dealers bill. It left here having language to say that it would be an unfair practice to require the dealers to have certain fixed assets outside of the facilities. That language was removed. Comes back to us with a clarification on the fixed assets, so it would be a fair practice for the dealers to have to provide fixed assets inside the dealership when it came to service, repairs, warranty work, or retail sales. Those are the changes.
For discussion? Chair sees none. The question is on the adoption motion. Kerr. When the machine is open, those in favor of adopting the motion will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. If all the members voted, tally the roll. Roll call shows 87 ayes, 3 noes. Motion to concur has been adopted. The clerk shall inform the Senate of the adoption of the motion to concur. We have a dissent motion, House motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move the concurrence filed on April 19, 2023 be withdrawn.
Further motion is second. All those in favor indicate saying aye. Those opposed no. Motion is adopted. We only have one Conference Committee report signed and ready to go to the rules, so we will not have a Rules Committee meeting today. We have, I think, a single bill that we passed on today that will be eligible for a Monday calendar. We will come in at 10 a.m. on Monday. Hopefully by that point we'll have more Conference Committee reports to sign. We'll come in, I think we have another staff recognition, maybe our last staff recognition, and then we will do what we did today. But I would expect on Monday that we'll start coming back multiple times during the day. So appreciate it. With that, we'll turn to Representative Payne for a motion. Heard the motion in a second. All those in favor indicate saying aye. Those opposed no. We are adjourned.